So, what would happen if you put this game on a console that did sell well? How about a Nintendo console? Well, guess what? That did happen in 2003. Just not on the Nintendo console you would expect. It's a great idea, right? Porting Jet Set Radio to another console with the GameCube controller. You would think the GameCube would be an obvious choice for something like this. It has cartoony and beautiful games like Wind Waker. It has a great controller. This game would fit right at home. Nope, they ported this to the fucking Game Boy Advance. Nothing in my life makes sense anymore. Like, really? The Game Boy Advance, like, why? This is like Super Monkey Ball Jr. all over again. But the most mysterious part of this port is that no one really talks about it, to the point where the Wikipedia page doesn't even say this is the final release in the series. And I think in part, it's not acknowledged as a Jet Set Radio entry because this game isn't unique, it doesn't have its own identity, and of course it just bears the same name, despite being referred to as Jet Set Radio Advance. So I think a lot of people just consider it a port, and it kind of is, but it's tough for me to say it's fully a port because, well, I don't know, compare these two games side by side and tell me these aren't different games. Technically, it does meet the description of a port. It's more like a demake, I guess. So I will accept it as one of those for the sake of this review. And yeah, there are the same levels, same characters, same story, same tutorial, even some of the same unlicensed songs make it over, which while very compressed, it's still neat. So yeah, it's kind of fair people ignore this game, but at the same time, it kind of blows my mind there's at least sort of a Jet Set Radio game pretty much no one talks about. And it could have been a really good clickbait title and video too, but who would do something like that? Jet Set Radio Advance was released in 2003 and ported by Vicarious Visions, who were responsible for porting the Tony Hawk games to the Game Boy Advance. There isn't too much information on the development of this game either, so I can't even begin to tell you why or how this game came to be. And you know, even if there was information, I still don't think I would really understand why. And I don't think it sold that well either. Now, my source here may not be entirely accurate, but the literal only information on sales I could find for this port was a poopy little graph on the VG Charts website, which says that this game sold 30,000 copies. I get that VG Charts isn't the most accurate, but there's no other information I could find on it, so I'm going with this, even if it's not correct. I don't think this game was a success, but I think this time around it's a bit more warranted. To be positive for a moment, the game looks really good for a Game Boy Advance game. It has previously mentioned bits of the songs. It's faithful for a Game Boy Advance game, but there's just one problem. At least in my opinion, it doesn't control well at all. They tried too hard to be like the original game, and I think they would have just been better off trying to make a 2D side-scroller or something of the sort that uses similar assets. We see this in some type of movie games, like when they make a Game Boy Advance port. You get the 3D one on console, and then the Game Boy Advance port's just kind of like a cheaper, easier side-scroller. But here they were just like, nah, do whatever it takes, put that game on a Game Boy Advance. But yeah, the controls are tremendously awkward, to me at least. It's apparently the same control scheme as the GBA Tony Hawk games, which I guess some fans say ends up working well, so I imagine that you could get good at this game if you put the time in, but at least as a casual player who doesn't care for these type of games, I think this control scheme is horrible, honestly. But yeah, I don't have a ton to say about it. It's Jet Set Radio, but downgraded. There really is no reason to play this game over the Dreamcast version. In fact, that's probably why it died to history. It's not unique. Jet Set Radio on GBA doesn't have its own identity. And listen, if this is the lowest point that this series has as a game, it's fine. I mean, there was also a mobile game. This is mostly lost media, so there isn't a ton to say about this one. There's only a few screenshots out there, but don't tell me that typing Jet isn't the reason you clicked on this video. I mean, look at this great game. Typing Jet was released on the Japanese exclusive J-phones, which, let's be kind to it, it's a phone that looks like crap nowadays, and we have phones better than computers, and at the time this was cool. There's a camera and 256 colors. Yeah, these things kind of sucked. Sega were always known for releasing mobile games on these handheld consoles, and always have seemed to embrace phones in all of their forms. Beloved series such as Sonic, Super Monkey Ball, and Puyo Puyo would find their way to these early mobile phones. So it's not that much of a reach that Jet Set Radio would find its way in some form as well. But just like the GBA version, no one really seemed to care. I mean, it probably was cared about even less. Judging by these few screenshots, you would type something and then Jet would do tricks. I don't know. It's tough to review a game you don't see gameplay of and you don't know anything about. Like, it's kind of a challenge. But I think for a crappy phone, it's a fine enough product. I don't know. What do you expect me to say about it? I just thought it was cool that it exists. Like, I had to talk about it. I'm gonna let an old friend take this one, so take it away, Mr. Shovelware. Hello, I'm Mr. Shovelware. I'm pretty much just JeffCompass, but I talk specifically about bad games, and the original Pac Man World 2, it's fine. But the GBA version is so bad that I cannot believe it exists. So yeah, this is fairly typical of games in this era. They always, and I mean always, would get GBA ports. Developers would walk to the literal end of the earth to produce a Game Boy Advance version of the game. They put everything on here. The first Pac Man World got a GBA version, so I guess it only made sense for the developers to ship out a World 2 port. Weirdly enough, though, this game came out in 2005, 3 years after the console version and close to Pac Man World 3. My only guess for this is that they saw Pac Man World 3 would be getting versions on every console besides the GBA, even getting a DS port, so they just kind of panicked and threw Pac Man World 2 on here to have something for like the holidays, and it wasn't super uncommon for GBA ports to come out later rather than sooner. Jet Set Radio Advanced was the same sort of thing. So here it is. Here's Pac Man World 2 on GBA. Oh god, that is some compressed audio, and I thought the at-game Sega Genesis was bad. Okay, look, I know it's a GBA game. I get it, okay? I get it. It doesn't change the fact that the music in this game literally makes me want to die. The story is still here using compressed screen caps and captions from the console version, which is fair enough. Alright, enough messing around. Let's see how it plays. Off the bat, we see that Pac Village has been recreated. Except you can't go through the doors, which pisses me off because it looks like you can. Oh, come on! I'm gonna be honest, they probably could have just cut this whole level. Like, I think they were just trying to be really faithful to the console version, but if you really think about it, it has no reason to exist here. At least with the console version, you had areas to go to, you have some NPCs, and a lot more to collect. You even have some mini tutorials, such as eating ghosts. But here, there's like 3 fruits and nothing else. All the moves are here. You can butt bounce and rev roll, ledge grab, you can even kick flip, although to be honest, I don't remember many instances where you really do this. One thing that sucks is that while the ghosts are present, you don't get that gratifying pause when you eat one. This kind of trips me up after playing the console version, honestly, because I keep expecting a pause. Some consistency would have gone a long way. Pac Man World 2 has a password system. You get one after each level. It's kind of weird because the password screen is missing a bunch of the alphabet. I really hate the tutorial level, actually. I found it harder than a lot of the levels in this game, if I'm being honest. They have all these signs to teach you the game, which, you know what, fair enough. The problem is, though, if you backtrack past it, which you will have to, oftentimes it forces you to read the text box again, even if it's now irrelevant. This reminds me of the Ben 10 game on Hyperscan. It's only a problem in this level mainly, but I spent like an hour trying to beat this level, so it's probably just fresh on the mind. Sometimes you can literally die and still read the text box, which feels like a slap in the face. Jerks. I will say graphically, this game looks pretty good. The sprite work is nice, and the backgrounds are nice and colorful. It's hard to judge what you can jump on and what you can't, though. That's not a platform? Like, this is debatable, I guess. I asked Twitter and Discord because I was honestly unsure if I had the right to be mad about this. Some people pointed out that even if it looks like a platform, you should be able to make the next jump. And some said they would distinguish it as a foreground object, although a lot of people did agree with me, at least in some capacity. I personally would die here frequently, even when I knew it wasn't a platform. I just had this, like, intuition to do it. And I think it's because it's bold and nothing else is, besides, like, the foreground, as I mentioned. But regardless of this instance, because this is a 2.5D type of game, there are platforms that you legitimately will fail and fail and fail to jump on. It's like that Indiana Jones NES game. Give me a damn break. That perception, no way around it, is a huge issue in Pac Man World 2. Oftentimes, it'll look like you can make jumps you can't. Sometimes you phase through fruits. It's honestly really frustrating, but what makes all of this so much worse is the perplexingly bad controls. Jumps just don't feel very good. It often feels like you barely make them. You can get a little more height with the butt bounce, but for some reason, I was never able to string these together very well, so I didn't want to always use it. If you don't time it perfectly, Pac-Man just kind of does a rolling animation instead. I don't know, guys, the game design is just really irritating. At one point, I got to the end of a section, but didn't know what to do. The only thing drawing the player's attention at this point is a giant shiny button, so I hit it to spawn a lemon. I thought hitting the box that unlocks with this lemon, and yes, these boxes returned from the console game, would be what I needed to do to continue. So I backtrack all the way back with some very peculiar jumps to get that stupid lemon. Then we backtrack again to get back to the lemon box. It's only a goddamn orange. So it turns out you're supposed to avoid all of that and just go right. Now tell me, is that a trap or what? Why wouldn't the player assume to just hit the shiny button? Up to this point, it's not established that you can just go right to continue. Why'd they have to trick me? Why not have a sign or something that just points right? Why make it a trick? This is one of those things that's like arguably my fault. But still, there was a bouncy pad, and getting that lemon was not easy. It's not like this is the console games where you get a token. Here, you have even less reason to collect stuff, unless you want to do it for score. I'm sorry, grand score. Excuse me, your royal highness. Some of the jumps that this game wants you to make are excruciating. These ramps come from hell. They really don't make any sense. The game wants you to butt bounce down them, which can work with enough trial and error, but as I said earlier, I think sometimes the issue is you just don't get a butt bounce when you need one, and instead go into the rolling animation. The rolling animation can actually happen at the edge of cliffs too sometimes, meaning you just outright die. So it's not an isolated incident either. The only consistent way I was able to make it over was tiptoeing to the edge and rev rolling, but with that, you're often just going to get too much speed and overshoot it. There's no way around it. You're going to lose your lives and game over in this game. One good thing is that the checkpoints are extremely plentiful. When I mean plentiful, I mean every platform after you die. While this is good in concept, sometimes you get placed on the very edge of a platform. Meaning if you're like holding a direction right after you die, like because you want another chance, forget it, you're dead. I think what's funny is the treetops level right after is a ton easier than the literal tutorial level. And looking at this, it's again a pretty faithful recreation of the console game. In fact, the whole game is, but funnily enough, they cut the whole water section out. You know what, I'm actually going to list that as a positive change. Congrats, you got something Pac Man World 2 on GBA. The bosses, true to the console version, are really hard. The bouncy pads really don't do enough for you in terms of getting height, since your horizontal distance peaks pretty early. Sometimes, even if you do get a butt bounce on the damn guy, it doesn't do anything. I guess that's also true to the console version. So things like eating ghosts and getting token, those are cut. Cut those out, we can't have those. But stupid things like bad hitboxes, yeah, keep those in, we need that. The time trials from the console version return, but this time they're really hard to avoid. I found myself always accidentally grabbing them, and it was kind of an obstacle to avoid not doing them. Ooh! Besides all that, this game really just lacks the variety and substance that Pac Man World 2 on console had. Every level is basically the same, with some minor changes in obstacles and enemy designs. I'll be honest, there's pretty much nothing of value in this game besides the cute graphics, so yeah, I don't recommend this one. Honestly, it has so little to do with Pac Man World 2 that it probably shouldn't have even been in this video. It just shares the name and that's it. Pac Man World 2 on GBA is like one of the most worthless, bad games that I have ever played in my life. Okay, it's not that bad, I'm kind of over-exaggerating. It's still probably like Sneakers or Sonic 06 or something, but anyways, I'm gonna let this go back to JeffCompass to conclude it. Thanks for having me, asshole. Pac Man World on Game Boy Advance was released in 2004. Yup, 5 years after the original Pac Man World. And at a time when the DS was almost out. Well, thankfully, they took out the 20th anniversary part in the title, which, as much as I complained about it prior, it's also just really weird to see it gone. It's cursed. It feels empty. Something should be there. I usually like to give some context regarding development here, but like with a lot of GBA ports, there's really not a lot out there. I mean, it was developed by Full Fat Games, who had a history of making these types of demakes prior, even continuing to the DS era. They were also responsible for Pac Man World 2 on GBA, and the menus are reused in that game. But yeah, I don't know, why does this version exist? I think because we failed as a society. If I don't cover this, who's going to? You know, like no one's gonna do a deep dive on this game, so if someone had to do it, it had to be me. I hate my life. Alright, here's what they cut. No more cutscenes. You get your grainy stills. You know what? Fair enough, the GBA is about as powerful as a pencil sharpener. About half the levels are gone now, with the entire factory world just outright missing, and the bosses are gone entirely except for Talkman. The music here is obviously a lot worse as well, but I don't know, the sky's blue. What do you want me to say? It's a given. There's also no more mazes, which that is weird, because you can still collect Galaxians, but they're treated like straight up fruits and just open a normal door. Well, I guess these ones are like red Galaxians. Maybe they just don't have any special zest to them. Like, I don't know, are red Galaxians known to be better in the Galaga games? It's a little disappointing. I think the GBA could have definitely handled some custom Pac-Man mazes, so that decision I'm not super happy about personally. And also, there's no original Pac-Man at all. Like, come on, you think that'd be a freebie for the game developers? It's a game as old as time. Even the GBA could handle that. In fact, Pac-Man's on the GBA. But if you look past all these things and just focus on what's here, I still think it's a decent product. I mean, look at this game. It's somewhat faithfully recreated. It's still 3D-esque, they didn't take any shortcuts here, and while it's obviously downgraded, it still looks really nice, and these levels are mostly the respective levels from the PlayStation game. Some mechanics are a little different though. They couldn't really do the rev roll thing from the Funhouse world, so you just get to rev roll 4 ramps in a row instead. Why they didn't just cut this from the game is beyond me. I don't know, it's boring and repetitive, kinda hurting the level design a bit here, not really following the developer's original intentions. Some rev roll ramps are now unfortunately a bit jank, especially in the last world. I would find myself flying over if I wasn't careful, which isn't really fair if you don't know what's up ahead, so I often just butt bounced up hills to compensate. I think presentation wise this game is a little rough around the edges. When Pac-Man jumps, he doesn't even bend his knees. Look at this guy. I mean, maybe Pac-Man's toes are just that strong because all you can see is a slight little bend in his foot. These menus are really poorly designed as well. I don't know if this was just me, but when I saw these 3 Pac pellets sitting on the menu for each world, I thought each one was correlated with a level. Well, no, not all worlds even have 3 levels, so it's just odd to me. I never got used to that in my entire playthrough. Why are those there? The keys are still here to rescue your friend. I didn't know if this was required at first, but in my playthrough, I really didn't want to risk it, so I made sure to get every last friend. I didn't want to have to be replaying this game, God forbid. While doing research later, I did find out that you actually don't have to rescue the friends. It's more or less for exploring, so actually that's a really positive change that the Game Boy Advance version takes. Alright, that's 1 for Pac Man World on GBA. Yeah, I don't know if we're going to be able to catch up here. The Pac-Man letters are also here, except this time they don't take you to a bonus level, which, I don't know, that's another thing that I feel was unnecessarily cut from the game. On the subject of collectibles, I don't even know where to put this, but we got to talk about something, so just sit down. On 1-2, I got all the letters and spelled out Pac-An. I couldn't find an M. I looked it up, I watched like 3 Let's Plays, and no one found it either. So I figured one of the 2 things was occurring here. The first is they forgot to code it in the game, which I thought was really unlikely. The second was what I thought occurred, being they hid it in a really cryptic place. Now tell me, who in the hell is gonna bounce in this tiny corner on a platform that's completely out of view? They had way too much faith in the player, especially considering this is the second level of the game. Like, I'm not trying to put anyone down, but no one's gonna solve that. We're not smart enough as human beings. I genuinely wonder how many kids even found that M, because the Let's Plays I watched, no one found it. So what were they going for here? Like, if this was a PlayStation trophy, it would be one of those that has like 0.02%. That is the most out of the way, most cryptic M I've ever seen. What does that M even stand for? Mean? You want to know another thing I hate about this game? The ghosts don't have that satisfying chomp once you eat one. No pause, no altered music, and not even an animation on Pac-Man. You just go through them like they're a ghost. Well, you got me there. I hate little things that are missing like this because it makes me feel the developers didn't really understand the source material, you know what I mean? The biggest issue I have with this game is that it just feels kind of weird to play. I found myself kind of nauseous, something I can't really describe, but it just hurt my head to play this at a certain point. The depth perception problems are in full blast here. If you thought they were bad in the PS1 version, well, you were right, but they're worse here. These clouds in the final world are so disorienting. I died so many times on these things. I do have to give the developers credit to an extent. They did add these arrows to indicate exactly where platforms line up. That's, of course, a much needed addition, but sometimes I don't even trust them. Like this arrow in 2-2. Come on, that block looks like it's in the foreground. I'm not gonna trust that. Everything feels like a leap of faith in this game, and I don't have faith in the developers, so this game is like half the responsibility for my outstanding trust issues. And what's up with this lava over here? You can see the exact vertical lines when they cut it off. I don't expect perfection from Game Boy Advance graphics, but this is just lazy. And when you save your friends, they don't even have proper grammar. There's no commas. Pac-Man, you are the best. Maybe that's on purpose. Maybe it's like, it's a dog. Dogs don't use commas. Dogs also can't talk. I don't know, the more I play this game, the more flaws I find in it. It might have been better to only play a few levels. I feel like I'm nitpicking almost, but some of these flaws are a huge deal to me. I hate these platforms that go up and down. The window is a lot shorter than in the original. It's like 3 frames, and if it's curved, forget it. You're rolling down. It's over for you. The game uses the same life system as the original, which kind of sucks, because now there's no bonus worlds or slot machines to bolster your life count. So what you get is a system that's not super optimized for the game the way they originally designed designed it. And on top of that, it's artificially harder. The Pac-Man fight, though, is fine. It's super easy. Your friends give you health again, this time being a reward for finding them instead of a forced requirement, and it's the same 3 phases in the original. And I don't know, I'm kind of mixed on this game. You could do a lot worse. You know what, if you were a kid growing up in this era, a game like this was a godsend. Sometimes you would buy a game originally released for consoles, and it would be a totally different game. This is at its core Pac Man World, just a sloppy rendition, but in this day and age, there's really no reason to ever touch it.
What? No, I'm not going to review the 3DS game. Just because I looked at the Game Boy Advance games for Pac Man World 1 and World 2, we're not going to be setting that dangerous precedent. The video's over. Go! Fine.
Well, I can't talk about this version to the extent I might like anyways, as I don't own a 3DS capture card, and it just so happens I end up having to talk about DS games pretty much every episode of this show somehow. Luigi's Mansion would make its way to the 3DS console in 2018. Pretty darn late into the handheld's lifespan, wouldn't you say? Fun fact that I'm sure you've heard before, but whatever, Luigi's Mansion on the GameCube was conceived to be visible in 3D, as this was a feature considered for the whole console fairly early on. Nintendo axed the idea when they realized 3D TVs had not taken up a significant share of the market. They still haven't, and I've never met anyone who's owned one. The remake does add a decent bit and changes up quite a lot. For one, the PAL-hidden mansion I talked about earlier is now in every version of the game, and it changes up a lot of the locations of the Speedy Spirits and Mario's items, and even switches up some of the portrait ghosts that you have to beat. There's a boss rush timed trial mode here, and there's also like an achievement system now, because Nintendo consoles don't have achievements like normal consoles do, so every game has to just make their own. It's a pretty easy thing to throw in a remake to add some replay value. Pikmin 3 Deluxe did this as well. There are 5 subsets of achievements, and upon completing all the achievements in one of the clusters, you get a little ghost added to your stand you can view in the gallery. There's some pretty hard achievements in here, like yeah, the beginner ones are something a baby will do in their casual playthrough, but there's also achievements like beating the game without ever going under 80 HP, and that's something I don't think I've ever done in one of my original playthroughs. These add quite a bit to the whole idea I mentioned that Luigi's Mansion is a game meant to be replayed over and over, and gives a lot more meaning to the money in this game when there are achievements you get by collecting money on repeat playthroughs. There's also multiplayer now. A second player can join, entering as a green blob Luigi, who comes from the future, which is Luigi's Mansion 3, which came out a year later. You see what they did there? It's clever. I highly recommend this mode if you like playing your games at 6 frames per second, which leads me to my next question.
Why in the holy mother of all that good and bad was this on the Nintendo 3DS? Probably the weakest thing they could have put it on. Phones had more power at the time, like unironically. Why wasn't it on the Switch?
Like, yes, I get the argument for it. Okay, I know the original was meant to be in 3D. That's cool, but the 3DS was not only extremely underpowered in 2018, it also pretty much turns this remake into a demake. What's the point? Graphically, while some models are more refined and the environments are definitely improved, who even cares? The console has a resolution output of 240p! Like, it almost looks worse because of that. Maybe I'm unnecessarily mad about this, whatever, but Luigi's Mansion is one of my favorite games of all time. I would have killed for an HD port. Like, GameCube remakes are treated like an actual joke at Nintendo. Miyamoto gets on stage every night. It's part of his routine comedy bit. That's how much it's funny to them. Like, we get Zelda HD ports. Cool. They're on the Wii U. No one bought that console. Super Mario Sunshine gets, like, destroyed in 3D All-Stars. And what else? Oh, there's nothing. Oh, but we get NES games up the goddamn kazoo. Fuck, man. And it's not just the fact that the graphics can't be appreciated even if they're better. It's also just like, this game doesn't control that well. It's not unworkable, but if you don't have a 3DS model with a second stick, you have to use emotion controls to even play this game, which isn't the end of the world. I know some people like gyro, and there's even control options that make it similar to Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon on the 3DS, but overall, this game simply was just not meant to be on this console. It just wasn't. The 3DS should have been long gone by then. Plus, if you're releasing Luigi's Mansion 3 on the Switch the next year, why would you promote the game by releasing the original on a handheld, but no one would play it in a few months anyways? What the hell happens in Nintendo's headquarters, man? Something crazy's going on there.
And here's the thing, Luigi's Mansion 3DS is a great game, a good remake on a wrong console, and that kills the entire thing, at least for me, because I'd rather just play it on my TV with a controller. And since Nintendo games don't get remade more than once, this is Luigi's Mansion's eternal life forever, just being stuck on a 3DS. Like, they're not gonna remake it for the Switch now because Nintendo never does that. No, that's why we have Super Mario 64 DS and nothing else. And they do the same for Ocarina of Time 3D, Majora's Mask 3D. Wait, there's a sequel on iOS, and I was just about to go on vacation.
Well, I don't know if this counts as a sequel. Basically, when I was doing research for this video, I came across a game called Pac Man Kart Rally, which even the fandom wikis don't know if it counts. So we're probably just screwed here. We're flying into some unprecedented territory, and that's what I do best. This game was released on mobile phones in 2010, but was delisted from everything in 2018. You see, in 2017, Namco was like, yeah, that's good, keep it up, guys. But in 2018, they were like, no, we can't have this on the App Store. Take it down right now. Apparently, it's on the Amazon Fire TV still too, to this day.
For all 6 of you who regularly use it?
Well, the only way I could play this game, kinda, was to get an Android emulation app named BlueStacks. Unfortunately, I could only find a demo, and I think I got a virus in the process. I don't know what this is, but it's a life lesson you gotta sacrifice for your... Booting up the game, we see... What the fuck is this? This is what you make of Pac-Man? What have you done? You guys made a complete mockery out of the character. That's not even Pac-Man. This is like a bootleg, but it's real. This isn't a joke or anything. This is seriously what a group of people in 2010 came together. Oh my God. Everything just looks so... Like, listen, I grew up with the earliest of iPhone games. I was one of the early adopters. I get first and foremost, it was a tough time for graphics, but still, Super Monkey Ball Sakura Edition came out roughly around the same time, and I wouldn't call it great, but look at this, it's somewhat faithful to the Banana Blitz's art style. If they really couldn't figure out how to make the 3D models look right, I don't think anyone would have really cared if they just made this a 2D type of game, something like F-Zero. And a lot of games did go for a cartoon aesthetic back then. Look at Angry Birds. But what certainly shouldn't have been an option is killing the image and soul of Pac-Man in this way. Even on the artwork for the game, like the load screens and stuff, it's probably one of the worst adaptations of Pac-Man. I hate Ghostly Adventures, but I would take that over this mockery any day of my goddamn life.
The good thing about gaming is that the graphics don't matter if the gameplay is good. It doesn't apply here.
Okay, so listen, I'm playing with a mouse, I get it, this isn't a one-for-one experience, and there's probably a few emulation bugs, but even with a touchscreen, man, I can't imagine this would play that well. It's really awkward to move in any sort of direction, and I'm laughing because that's the biggest aspect of a racing game. The AI is completely unbalanced too. If they get in front of you, you pretty much already lost. I feel like there's a significant lack of rubber banding in the coding here. For those who don't know what that means, if you're in last, the ghosts get a little bit slower, and vice versa, to balance out the race and give everyone a bit more of a fair chance during the duration of it. Just go to a Mario Kart 64 review and I'm sure someone will be complaining about it. Basically here, I don't think they programmed it or didn't program it that much, so when you fall behind, you really fall behind. In fact, the only reason I was able to even win the first race was because of a glitch I discovered. Going backwards past the finish line here, for some reason, let me skip to the second lap. I couldn't replicate this again for the life of me. Are you surprised though? This is beyond spaghetti code. It's like whole grains. And to be fair, this part of the game could just be running extra weird because I'm on BlueStacks, but I don't know. I don't know about this one, guys. And you know what? If I was complaining about the generic levels in World Rally, it's the goddamn Mona Lisa compared to this game. Where's the personality? What the hell happened here? It's just grassy plains and 2 tracks have cherry trees. This is less Pac-Man than Pac Man World Rally, and that wasn't even Pac-Man. In fact, I don't even know if I count this as a Pac-Man game. Reviewing this game, honestly, I feel bad. It makes me feel like I'm bullying someone. It's so bad that I can't help but just feel like I'm punching down. Like, I can't do this, guys. I'm sorry. It almost feels like this should be beyond critique, because the developers, I feel bad for them. They clearly had no idea what they were doing, and it's a good thing this game was never talked about, because honestly, if Pac Man World Rally was the Monkey Ball Adventure of the franchise, this is the Sonic 06 of it.
Well, I guess this concludes our Pac Man World retrospective, and it's kind of just like, should I have even put this in the retrospective? Well, you know what? Maybe they shouldn't have put the word Pac Man World in the title. So screw it, what do we have to lose at this point? Pac Man World as a series would die here. But in terms of 3D Pac-Man platforming, there were going to be a few more games under the name Ghostly Adventures. So, you know what? We're going to take a look at it. We can't end here because we need to show as much love and care for the Pac-Man franchise that the developers didn't show for this game. Otherwise, we're just as bad as them. Also, I just got sued by Namco for showing off that kart racing game on iOS because they said it's too damaging to the Pac-Man brand. You guys signed off on this game, what?
Yep, another Game Boy Advance port. Pac Man World and Pac Man World 2 got one, all made by the same corporate shills over at Full Fat Studios. This was inevitable, and by inevitable, I mean this came out 4 years later. You know, let me tell you something, guys. Game developers would go to the literal end of the earth, on fire and bleeding, to make a GBA port. They would take a shot to the heart, they would jump off a cliff, they would sacrifice a duck live in 4K to make a GBA port happen. It was crucial, okay? Every game, every goddamn motherfucking poopy game got a GBA port or equivalent. Jet Set Radio, Super Monkey Ball, Jimmy Neutron, The Cat in the Hat, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Grand Theft fucking Auto. It was a necessity, a mastering of the arts. Every game needed one. Every franchise you can even imagine needed to be on the GBA. And why?
Good question.
Let's recap on the GBA ports in this franchise real quick though. Pac Man World 1's port was like fine. I mean, it had some problems. I wouldn't feel safe showing it to my parents, let's just say that. It was dumbed down a bit, they removed a whole world, it was kind of sloppy, and there were occasional points of massive frustration. But you could do a lot worse. Pac Man World 2, trash, like actual unbridled trash. They turned a 3D game into a side scroller, and it was clear they didn't know what they were doing, and I consider it one of the worst games I've ever played. But this one is really interesting. Let's remember the thesis of this introduction. This Pac Man Maze Madness is a lot more simple, and as a result, the GBA port is actually a very seamless transition. It's not one for one or anything. I mean, they did cut a few levels, specifically the ones before the final Mesmeralda fight. There's some small things that are off too. Like in the original game, you could push an ice block into lava, use a reset coin, and then push another one, rinse and repeat. You can't do that here, so I really don't know how you're supposed to get this fruit. It might just genuinely be impossible.
What the hell was that?
What a cruel prank. I genuinely don't understand why they did this. Some puzzles have been completely dumbed down as well. And the TNT block timers have been substantially increased. You can take a phone call in the time they give you here.
Hey, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm good. I'm just playing Miss Pac Man Maze Madness for the GBA.
You know what really sucks though is that there's no word of encouragement or a pack compass for any area with the pack dots, so often it's completely possible to leave the area while not having collected everything. The music here is also basically unlistenable, and in fact I actually had to mute the whole game because it was hurting my ears. Like the other Pac Man GBA games, they're just ridiculously compressed. I recommend turning on an album or podcast if you're playing this version.
Or, you know, just don't play this version, probably.
Ugh, I hate these switches. In the original game, they would turn green if you walked in them, or as a confirmation you stepped on one of a set in the right order. Well, here they just turn into a slightly darker shade of red.
Listen, this is a Game Boy Advance game. I can understand cutting a few levels out, I can understand worse music, worse graphics. What I don't understand is not having the color green.
But you know what? For all the trash I just talked, they actually fixed the format of the game. The witch key thing has been very much downsized. A few blocks still exist, but only in maybe a few levels. So you can actually collect stuff on your first go around. It's crazy. The time trials have been shifted to much more lenient times, without any clocks or eating ghosts involved, and are more of a genuine speed run. You can basically get almost every star on your first playthrough. Not to mention, they lowered the total amount for the final fight.
I can't believe I'm saying this, but Full Fat Games kind of improved this game.
I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that the GBA version is better. Let's be fair, mostly everything is worse, but in terms of the actual game structure, it's a goddamn improvement. I still recommend you play the Dreamcast or PS1 version, and there's even entire side modes in the console games that didn't make it to the GBA version. These include a multiplayer mode where you try to collect the most pack dots in a few different styles, and the ability to play OG Ms. Pac Man. But you know what? Screw it. I'm saying it. I had more fun with this version than the console one, because the Game Boy Advance inherently doesn't ruin the gameplay. It still works nearly perfectly. We're not talking Pac Man World 2, where it's basically an entire different game, or World 1, where they awkwardly had to adapt to 3D style. I mean, this is a faithful version of Miss Pac Man Maze Madness, and it works in part due to that grid style and simplistic nature of the game. It's the best GBA port I've reviewed on this show, and that's not saying a lot, but it's saying something.